Good evening. Welcome to the second program in the Holocaust Memorial and Tolerance Center's series, The Catskills on the Big and Small Screen. My name is Thorin Tritter. I'm the Museum and Programming Director at the Holocaust Memorial and Tolerance Center, which is located in Glen Cove, New York. Our program today is part of a larger effort on our part to draw attention to the culture of the Yiddish-speaking world of Eastern Europe that the Nazis tried to destroy, but which was transplanted, in some cases, to the United States. The Catskills, as I'm sure you know, became the most well-known playground and summer retreat for Yiddish-speaking and other Jewish residents of the Northeast in the post-war period. Before I go on to say more about our program tonight, let me put in a plug for several of our other upcoming programs. Tomorrow, March 10th at noon, I will be giving my next Curator's Corner program. These are weekly programs that I've been giving. And this one's going to be held in conjunction with Women's History Month, and will focus on a large photograph in our first gallery that shows Charlotte Gilman and her family in Antwerp right after the war. And I'm going to talk about Charlotte Gilman's amazing story and discuss how the Holocaust unfolded in Belgium. On Sunday, there is a rally taking place, and I want to draw all of your attention to this. You know, our movie tonight is a kind of lighthearted movie, but we are dealing with some serious issues in Long Island and across the country, and one of them is the rise of anti-Chinese sentiment. And so one of the county legislators here on Long Island has organized a rally, and HMTC is delighted to partner with a number of other local organizations to support this Stand Up to Hate rally. So we're meeting in Mineola, right on the steps of the Executive and Legislative Building on Sunday at 11 a.m. And I hope you will join us and show your support for the Asian American community that's really been suffering through some horrendous attacks. Also on Sunday, we have our Sunday with Survivors program. This is a monthly program that we do where we hear testimony from one survivor. And this month, we're hearing from Ruth Rachel Mermelstein, whose story includes survival from Auschwitz and liberation from Bergen-Belsen. And the other program I wanted to mention, of course, is the final program in this series, which will be held on Sunday, March 21st at 1 o'clock. So Sunday, March 21st at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, we're going to be talking about probably the most famous film or well-known film about the Catskills, or takes place in the Catskills, Dirty Dancing. I should say we're not going to be showing the film Dirty Dancing. I encourage you all to find another place where you can watch it. I think it's on HBO. It's on a lot of places. I hope we'll be able to show some clips, but we're not able to show the entire film on that program, but we will be discussing it. I think it's one that many people know. Anyway, okay. As always, you can find details about these programs and all our programs on our website at www.hmtcli.org and click on the Events tab. Okay, so let's talk about the Catskills. 2 weeks ago, we launched our series with a showing of an episode of The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, which offered a depiction of the Catskills in 1959 in its heyday. Today, we're going to be screening Sweet Lorraine, which offers a view of the Catskills almost 30 years later and provides a very different perspective. To help us compare and contrast today's film with the episode from The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, we are honored to have with us Dr. Linda Burghardt, who's been studying the history of the Catskills and has a wealth of knowledge to share with us. Dr. Burghardt is a journalist and author and the scholar in residence at the Holocaust Memorial and Tolerance Center. Her career has included working as a freelance reporter for the New York Times for 20 years, and she's also the author of 3 nonfiction books and numerous articles and essays that have been published in newspapers across the United States and overseas. She has a doctorate in Holocaust research, and she has lectured widely to both national and international audiences. I am very pleased to welcome her back to our virtual stage to set up our program for this evening. So, Linda.
Thank you so much, Thorin. So it's great to be here tonight to talk to you about a warm, funny, touching film, Sweet Lorraine. And this is a film about Jewish food, about Jewish humor, and about a smart, lovable Jewish mother running a hotel that's caught in the crosswinds of an era that is approaching its end. So Sweet Lorraine is a very unusual movie. For one thing, it's one of only 2 major feature films ever made about the Borscht Belt, although others have used the Catskills as a backdrop or as a setting, with their soothing mountain views, their top entertainment, and so many wonderful opportunities for leisure. For another, it's the only Borscht Belt film that is contemporaneous with its subject. That is, in other words, it was made in the 80s about the 80s. So it's a film about a place that was in trouble, made while the trouble that was actually going on. So this is not an easy idea to carry off, but it's done here very successfully. It's about the change in the Catskills from the bustling multi-million-dollar Jewish summer playland it was for New Yorkers from the 50s to the 70s and a little longer, and to the mere shell that it was to become and how that played out at one particular hotel. So as you will see in the movie, the legendary, though fictional Hotel Lorraine, once majestic, is beginning to feel the pinch of changing times. Lillian Garber, the hotel owner, is a warm, believable character with a very friendly, outgoing, kindly demeanor. So she's played by the superb Maureen Stapleton. And this character is deeply worried about the future of her beloved resort. This has been in the family for generations, and it's very much a part of her. So, but the hotel, even though it's teetering on the edge of decline, has a big heart, and the warmth and the comfort that it offers the guests who come back year after year shine brightly through, and this is what keeps it going. So the staff in the all-important kitchen in particular are totally dedicated to keeping the guests happy. But by 1987, when this movie was made and when it takes place, most of the hotels and resorts in Sullivan County, the geographical area known as the Borscht Belt, had closed. Even Grossinger's, the enormous, hugely successful resort that welcomed guests for 6 decades, had been shut down. So Sweet Lorraine, as I said earlier, takes place in real time when the Catskills were actually in serious decline. But still, glimmers of its magical past shine through. The Lorraine is holding on. The basic premise of the movie is this: can Lillian Garber, whose family has owned and operated the Hotel Lorraine for generations, keep the guests coming and make them happy, and when they get there, and make them remember the hotel throughout the winter and sign up for next summer? So, or should she close the hotel at the end of the season and sell the land to the real estate developers who have been circling, they have been pursuing her, and perhaps they have an eye to tearing it down? So into this mix steps Lillian's charming granddaughter, Molly, an energetic 20-year-old from Arizona who wants to work there for the summer. So will Molly fall in love with the hotel and want to save it? Is there a future to preserving family traditions? Or has the world changed so much that what was once held sacred no longer even matters? The action in the movie takes place from just before Memorial Day, when the hotel is being set up for the summer feasts, to the Labor Day weekend when it traditionally closes. But this year is different. Will the struggling Lorraine open again next year, or will this one have been its last? The model for the Lorraine Hotel is the real-life Hayden Hotel in South Fallsburg, a big, fun-filled jewel of a resort that had been in the family and family-operated since it was built in 1906. The producer and director of Sweet Lorraine is a man named Steve Gomer, who coincidentally happens to be the son-in-law of the Hayden's last owner, who worked there, and he worked there for many summers, so many that he said that his life became melded with the life of the hotel. So Sweet Lorraine is in some ways a bittersweet story, but in others, a deeply felt and exultant homage to a lost way of life. The Hayden Hotel was shut down in 1987 as soon as the principal shooting of this film was made, and then sat empty and abandoned until 2008, when a sudden wildfire ripped through the old timbers and burnt it to the ground. Although Sweet Lorraine was carefully crafted, it was entirely eclipsed by the far more famous Dirty Dancing, which ironically came out in the same year, the only 2 Borscht Belt movies, feature films. That film takes place at a fancier, more upscale resort. We'll talk about that next time, 10 days, and is much slicker and more polished with outstanding music and dancing, as we will see. Of course, it is also set 24 years earlier than this film, when the success of the Borscht Belt was at its height. So Sweet Lorraine did not get much attention when it came out, unfortunately, even though it did showcase actors who had their screen debuts in the film, such as, surprisingly, Edith Falco, who went on to play the famous Carmela Soprano in the long-running HBO series. You'll see her here as a young woman named Karen. So Sweet Lorraine is also a film with a deep Jewish sensibility, as we will see, and it recreates the Catskills hotel experience of the time in a very thorough way with very specific detail, perfecting the sour cream, turning cabbage into coleslaw by hand, selecting the right mayonnaise. These all tell as much of the story as the actors. So do the authentically bad jokes of the social director and the hectic flurry in the kitchen and the deceptive calm in the dining room, do they show exactly how things worked at the Catskill hotels? Yes. The acting is excellent, but the real star of the film is the hotel itself. The film overflows with affection for the hotel and the era that it represents, the golden days of the Borscht Belt. At heart, the film is an American Jewish nostalgia piece, one which compares favorably with Neil Simon's Brighton Beach Memoirs and Woody Allen's Radio Days, two films you probably know and remember. But Sweet Lorraine is a low-budget independent film, a sweet story named after a song made famous by the beloved jazz artist Nat King Cole. And it remains a poignant tale about the family members and the young people who keep an aging, unforgettable, traditional Jewish family resort alive for one last summer. So let's take a look at the film now and see what you think. I hope you enjoy it, and I'll be very interested to hear your comments after the screening is over.
Welcome back, and I hope you enjoyed the program and the screening. We're going to take a few minutes now and answer some of your questions and have Linda Burghardt, Dr. Linda Burghardt, tell us a little about her take on this perspective that we just saw. This was notably a longer film than what we showed in our last program, so hopefully you have a chance to get a drink of water or take a stretch. But I'd like to ask you some questions, Linda, and I know some questions are coming in. Before we go further, I just want to highlight a couple of things. First of all, we will have a recording of the discussion portion of our program on our YouTube channel, and I'll send that around. Because of licensing issues, we're not able to provide a recording of the film, although everybody can find a copy if they're interested in seeing it again. I think it's generally out there, although not as readily available as a film like Dirty Dancing. The other thing I wanted to make clear now, I wanted to say it because I don't say it enough, and that is I wanted to thank Bill Taub, who works behind the scenes to make our film presentations happen. And so while people are on, I just want to recognize him and say thanks very much, Bill. Okay, so let's get to our, oops, let me take this off. Let's get to our post-screening discussion. And maybe Linda, if I know some questions are coming in and I'll come to them in just a minute, but let me ask you a broad question. And this is where you started before the film, just about the depiction we see here of the 1980s in the Catskills. And I think you said at the beginning that you think this is a pretty accurate depiction of the Catskills in their period of decline in the 1980s. Can you tell us a little bit about why did the Catskills, why didn't it last? What happened?
That's a big question. There's so many answers to that. The world changed, the culture changed, and the Jewish community changed all at once. And it was a big slide and a pretty fast slide. You know, Lillian says in the movie that the hotel's been for sale for 15 years. So if you figure it's 1987, the hotel went on sale for the first time in 1972. And that's just right, because the world changed so much. And Kids didn't want to go to the hotels with their parents anymore when they became teenagers. There was a lot of interfaith marriage, and a lot of times the Gentile spouse didn't want to go to the Jewish hotels. There were so many changes technologically. Television, of course, had been around for quite a while, but was much more prevalent, TV and the movies, and people didn't go to live entertainment as much as the 60s progressed. Air conditioning, people could stay home and be relatively comfortable. Airline fares dropped. They dropped precipitously. People could now travel for not that much more than it would cost to go to the Catskills. People would go to the Catskills often for the whole summer, but then they started taking 2-week vacations to Europe or Hawaii or somewhere in the Caribbean. So much changed. And it was really sad because the Catskills, the whole Borscht Belt region couldn't keep up with it. They didn't see how culture was changing, and they failed. They just failed miserably. Most of the hotels went bankrupt.
You know, I've seen it in the chat and in the Q&A. There have been a lot of people who have been commenting about sad. That's kind of the kind of feeling we have as we see this depiction and we remember, or it brings back memories for I think many of the people who are watching. And then to know that that's a kind of, it was the end of an era, the end of a kind of the heyday. That's the sad part of the story. I wanted to ask you about kind of a different thing, which is, you know, when we talked about the Marvelous Mrs. Maisel episode, you described how the Catskills had one of the things that made it so popular was that there were a range of resorts and bungalows that catered to kind of every economic niche. And I'm wondering about what's your take here about where was the fictional Lorraine Hotel in that spectrum? Was this the same kind of high-end place as we saw in the Marvelous Mrs. Maisel episode, or did that place didn't exist in the 1980s anymore? That high-end?
The high-end places, they existed. They were also failing at the same time. I think Grossinger's closed the same year. The Concord kept going into the 90s, but this hotel was not that level of resort. It was a friendly, warm, homey resort, maybe more correctly called a hotel rather than a resort. We saw it has bungalows, and so it has some cottages, but it has the main building. And people all know each other. There's this sense of home. And in Mrs. Maisel, when they arrive and the owner comes out and he treats them like celebrities. And here, Lillian Garber treats the people as friends. And so it's a different sensibility. So she wasn't running one of the high-end resorts, but if you maybe think of 4 categories, the boarding house areas, the bungalow colonies, then the smaller hotels, and then the really upscale resorts. So she was in that 3rd category of the smaller hotels, which were very nice and very beautiful, but they were not glitzy and they didn't have the kind of celebrity feel that we saw in Mrs. Maisel.
Now, I should just ask if people have questions. I know some people are typing them in. I just encourage everybody, if they have questions, to go ahead and use the Q&A feature to submit them. And so one person mentions that she saw this film 34 years ago and really enjoyed it, but never really noticed all the details. And I think that is one of the things that comes across as you watch this is the details are, I think, where the Jewish story fits in. Like that, Maureen Stapleton doesn't come across to me as very Jewish, and many of the other actors here don't. But there are these little details that are scattered through, which to me reminded me or make me think about the Catskills. Is that, how do you look at this, and what about the details that did strike you?
Oh, the details are wonderful. And also the guests are, to my mind, Jewish looking. The staff are different, but staff comes from all over the place. But the guests, they definitely reminded me many people that I know and have known over the years. So I thought that was very well done. And then the Freddie Roman, the Tumler, was hilarious. You know, the corny jokes, they're just awful, but they're so funny. And the, Rosh Hashanah Indians, I mean, some of the stuff was just a scream. So there's a lot of Judaism in it, but it's pretty subtle, I think.
Yeah. Somebody mentions, and we're going to get to this obviously, in our next program, but they say this seems much more realistic than Dirty Dancing. But again, we'll come to that next time. But as you said when we started, Linda, this is a film where the Catskills really, and this hotel, is a central character. Unlike in Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, where it's kind of a backdrop for a story. But here, it's about the hotel.
Yes.
And so what is it that comes across more strongly here, do you think, about the Catskills than maybe we saw in something like The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel?
Well, there's so much work in the kitchen. We're really treated to everything. They make the coffee, they make the bread, they make the coleslaw. And so it's really a very authentic movie. It's in some ways a little bit of cinema verite, because they're really showing you what happens. And it's all part of the story, but you can take a lot of that out and still have the story. So they're kind of building a nostalgic picture of what life was like at the hotel, and it's very real.
I think you mentioned this at the beginning, but people are asking about it. What was the original, or where was the original hotel, Lorraine, located? And what's on the property now? Just tell us that one more time.
Oh, okay. So it was the Hotel Heiden, Heiden, and it was the Heiden family, and it was in South Fallsburg. And all that's left now, I believe, are a few little cottages that lasted and are unused as far as I know, because the hotel burned down and the land was never developed into anything else. And of course, the son-in-law is the producer and director of this film, and he married the daughter of the last owner of the Heiden Hotel. And he's extremely involved in the hotel, which is why when you know that background, you can see the authenticity of this movie. I mean, the staff go to Tip Top and Poppins, and those are all real places. When the fellow says, let's go to Poppins for roast pork sandwiches, well, that's what staff did at the hotels. They would be at kosher hotels and they would run off and have roast pork sandwiches just because you could. So those are real things. I think a lot of locals were used in the movie, and we didn't see all the credits at the end because they do go on forever, but there are Heidens in the credits. So that's kind of interesting. And so I don't know if you noticed, there was one scene in Molly's room, not Molly's room, Lillian's room in her apartment, where there's a framed poster of a tree, and then underneath it says David Heiden. And he must be the artist of that. I only know this because I saw the film so many times. It's one of those little details, and they were really looking to make it real.
Somebody says that this was, the Heiden Hotel was just down the road from the Raleigh Hotel. That was just another, I guess, location up there that people might recognize.
Yeah.
Somebody else refers to this movie as a love story to the Catskills, or a love story about the Catskills.
Very well put. Absolutely true. Yes.
So I wanted to ask you a question that I asked about the last film when we watched The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, which is, what's distinctive in this film about the Catskills? If this film had not been positioned in the Catskills, what would have to be dropped? What was it that made this Catskillian?
It's really the way that people act toward each other, the way they behave and their feelings. The hotel itself really could be somewhere else. You know, it had a beautiful setting with lawns and trees and a pool and water and so on, but it really could be somewhere else that has an old wood structure hotel like that. But the way the people on the staff treat each other, and the affection and the sense of bringing the guests back, like that scene where the fellow says, well, we wanted something different, so we went to the Poconos. They had heart-shaped bathtubs, but nobody knew who we were. And so, you know, of course, Lillian Garber takes his arm and she's welcoming him back with heart. And that's a real Catskills quality. And the hotels in the Catskills and the bungalow colonies and even the cuckoo lanes, the very inexpensive boarding house rooms, the people who ran those places were very involved emotionally with the guests.
Some people are asking about if there's been an uptick more recently in the Catskills because of the pandemic and people fleeing New York City. I've seen several articles recently talking about suburban real estate boom. Is that spreading north to the Catskills or west to the Catskills?
There is some, it's true, not at the hotels because there's very little of any of that left. People, yes, have been buying houses in order to live outside of the city, but there's no culture left. The hotels are gone, the resorts are gone. There are attempts at bringing gambling into the area with a little bit of success, but not very much. So yeah, people are going there, but they're not having an old-fashioned Catskill experience.
Right. Somebody is correcting my pronunciation of I had said Raleigh Hotel, apparently Raleigh Hotel.
It's the Raleigh, yes, yes. The Raleigh is still around. It's an Orthodox enclave. It's one of the few that has been turned into something useful. And there are a number of Orthodox families who go there for the whole summer, and they're very independent and closed just for their own people.
And that's actually, there's some references to the Orthodox community moving up into the Catskills in this film. At the very early on, they're driving to the hotel, and there's a group of Orthodox Jewish men who are walking down the street. Right. And then the suggestion, at least initially, is that it's Orthodox Jews who are going to buy the hotel. Yes. So when did the area become a place where there was a large Orthodox community, or maybe there isn't a large Orthodox community? What's the relationship there?
It happened pretty much in the 90s after the hotels and resorts closed down. The Orthodox people saw a place to go where, an area where Jews were accepted. You know, you'll notice in the movie that, you know, there's an Asian guy, and there are a couple of black kids, and, you know, there's a Hispanic person playing on the team. Like, well, catch that ball. What's wrong with you? And there's a lot of openness that is endemic to the Catskills. It's been there for 30, 40, 50 years. And so I think the Orthodox went there for a number of reasons. One, because there were places for them that they could go. The bungalow colonies were perfect because they could be in their own little place, but all be together. And also the community would accept them. They were, you know, any non-Jews who lived there, most of the locals were Christian, were accepting of Jews because Jews came every summer for many, many years. So it was a good idea. It was a good place.
I'm just reading through some of the comments coming in, and somebody said they worked as a busboy. It was a very realistic depiction of how the kitchen ran. Somebody else said that their family owned the Greenwood Lodge down the road from Jack's Corner. And this is bringing back some memories from that. Somebody else saying, I think you referred to this earlier at the start. Did you say that the building did burn down and there's nothing left right now on this location?
Yeah, there are some cottages left on the land that aren't used, but the building was empty from 1986 until when it closed to 2008. And then there was a fire and burned down. It was a whole, you know, big deal, and, you know, danger to, you know, the area, but no one was hurt. No one was in it. No one was using it. Yeah, kind of sad.
Some people are mentioning there was always this thought that maybe gambling would save the Catskills, and that hasn't panned out. Is that your understanding of things too?
Yeah, it hasn't panned out. People are still going to Foxwoods in Connecticut. So they're just not going to the Catskills. At the area where the Concord was on Kiamish Lake, they did put in, with the local Native Americans, they did put in a gambling site. I think it's called Resorts World International, and they built a water park and a hotel. It didn't quite work. It was just opened in 2018 and I think closed in 2019.
Somebody else is raising a question, which I guess I had not thought of, but seems an obvious one, which is, we think of the Catskills as as a place to go in the summer. When did they start becoming a winter venue as well? Or were they ever a winter venue? Somebody's mentioning ice skating and indoor swimming and things that developed there. So when did it become a full year-round place to visit?
In about the mid-60s, because the summer success was so enormous before it fell over, that some of the big hotels like the Concord put in indoor skating rink and indoor swimming pools and ski slopes and those sorts of things to stay open all year round.
Just a few more people are saying that somebody says the Resorts World Casino is still open. And somebody else says that their grandparents owned the Prospect Hotel in Swan Lake that was very similar to the Hotel Lorraine. And again, just some more of these memories that people brought back. You know, one of the things we talked about when we talked about the Marvelous Mrs. Maisel was the absence of children. And now in this film, there are a few scenes, but again, children not a main focus. And I wondered if you had thought about, or if this was something that kind of crossed your mind, and if there's something different going on here than what we saw in the Marvelous Mrs. Maisel.
Oh, definitely. It's you could tell that the place is very family oriented, even though there are only a few scenes with children on the swings, children in the swimming pool. You have to come out, your lips are blue. We've all heard that. We've all said it as parents. That was, you know, those things were very heartwarming. They were just little pieces that were put in. I think during the baseball game, there were some kids wrestling with each other on the lawn behind the square where they were playing. The children weren't part of the story, but they were a presence. I felt them there. And
I wondered if part of the difference was also that in the 1980s, maybe the crowd that was still going to the Catskills was less family than it had been in the 1960s. And that, you know, and I think it was represented perhaps, I assumed accurately, that, you know, the people we see it's an older crowd.
Yes. Yes.
And maybe that's just because in the 1980s, it was an older crowd who was going to the
That's absolutely true. Yes. And also, you know, if you think back demographically, in the 1970s, the birth rate dropped enormously. You know, there was much more talk especially late 60s, early 70s among women. Do we have to have children? We don't have to have children. We have a choice. So a lot of women chose to delay childbirth. And so the early and mid and even the late 70s, there were far fewer kids being born. So in the 80s, there was, especially when this is made, 87, it was a different kind of sense of family. There were far fewer nuclear families at the time.
And people are pointing out that, as we talked about last time, that maybe the kids would have been in the camp section of the hotel and, you know, been off in a kind of programming. So as you said, they weren't part of the main story here. So we're not seeing them, but they might have been there. But there were also other summer camp activities that kids might have been going to rather than going up to the Catskills by the 1980s.
Yes.
So I wanted to this is something strange, and we're going to talk about it more, I'm sure, in a couple of weeks when we see Dirty Dancing. But we've got these two films, Dirty Dancing and The Sweet Lorraine, that both come out in 1987, as you said when we started. Was there something going on in the late 1980s that might have sparked a belief that these films in the Catskills was a good idea? I mean, what's going on? Why two films the same year, same place?
I will try to find out the answer to that for when we talk about Dirty Dancing, even though, of course, Dirty Dancing takes place in 1963. So it's a very different era and shows a very different side of the Catskills. My only thought is that because the Catskills were declining and really had just really failed by 1985, 1986, 1987, that there was interest in that because of the change. And that's why two films came out. But it is really bizarre, and it was unfortunate for Sweet Lorraine that it just got subsumed by Dirty Dancing, which is, you know, a happy film and so full of life and excitement, you know, and entertainment. You just can't not love it.
Well, I think there are some fans, but I think there are also some people who are not big fans of Dirty Dancing. But we will come to that next time. But yeah, somebody else is agreeing with you and says that maybe it was the nostalgia for what had been in the Catskills that sparked at least two filmmakers to say, let's draw attention to this, although in very different ways. One looking backward, one giving a kind of contemporary depiction in the 1980s about how things had changed.
Yes.
Are there things that, when you thought about what you were going to say this evening, are there some things that we haven't gotten to that you thought, this is the thing I really want to highlight, Thorne?
Well, I'm glad you brought up nostalgia, because this is a nostalgia film. In some ways, I have the feeling that Steve Gomer didn't care if the film was a success or not. He was putting together just a story about something he loved. And he had the wherewithal to turn it into a major film that was released by a major studio and showed in theaters. But I'm not sure that he cared beyond creating it so that we would have the memory of it. So I think that's a very important part of the film. The film is sweet and it's tender and it's sad and it tells a very interesting, nice story, I think. But more than that, it takes a time and it really puts it into a time capsule.
You know, I think the story has a strange ending. You know, it's kind of built up this relationship, but that just poof, kind of disappears. We don't really understand what's going to happen to it. And the hotel, it's sold, but with such little fanfare. And
Yes.
it's almost like you could miss it. And there's you know, but then we learn it is going to be sold. These people are going to run it as a hotel of some sort. But in some ways, there's no strong finish at this film. It really seems to fade away.
That's true. I mean, I think the ending, it's kind of a dream of the owners of the Hayden Hotel that someone would have come along and said, we will make your hotel better and we will modernize it and we will put in a spa and we'll put in all these fancy cottages and young upscale people will come. I think that's just a dream. And so it ended that way, which of course, you know, it's going to be a little bit unsatisfying.
And pay off the owner.
Right. And what, right, exactly. And why is Lillian moving to the Bronx? Why doesn't Sam move to Miami? So I didn't get that part. Like, they're making the wrong decision here.
Somebody's asking about, is there a Catskill Resort Museum or a museum somewhere in the Catskills, or could there be, do you think, to this history?
I don't know of a museum. I know of the Catskill Historical Association. I'm not sure I have the name correct, but it studies the Catskills and what happened there and what's happening now. So there are all sorts of records with pictures and information. They have very significant archives. I can come up with the name of it and see if I can get it to you. There's only one organization that does that. I don't know of another one, and I don't know of a museum, but it would be a great idea.
A few people have mentioned another movie that we didn't show, and actually I need to look it up. I guess it's called A Walk on the Moon or something. Are you familiar with that movie?
A little bit. It came out after the 1969 moon landing, and it deals with that, and it deals with Woodstock, and so it's Catskills related. It's not really about the Catskills. Again, it's the setting of the Catskills.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, somebody put into that there's a museum, www.catskillresortmuseum.com. I'm going to pop that in the chat.
I have to look that up.
I don't know much about it, but I'm just going to pop it out there and people can go take a look as well. Somebody else all mentions the Sullivan County Museum that has some stuff on it. And somebody says Jack Godfrey is working on a Catskill Museum. So,
okay, that's wonderful.
Some interest. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Yes. Yes.
Oh, well, there we go. We're getting a bunch of, somebody says there's a committee for the future Catskill Museum and somebody's on the board of it who's watching. So great. Maybe I want to kind of wrap things up because I know it was a long movie and we don't want our program to go too long, but are there any kind of concluding remarks you'd make about this film or foreshadowing that you'd like to offer for our next program, which I will say March 21st at 1 o'clock, we're going to talk about Dirty Dancing.
I would relate it to the past rather than to the past even before Dirty Dancing as a note to end it on. And that's that when World War II ended and people, I think Sam says this in the movie, that people had money and people had cars and people just wanted to go out and have a good time. And it brought the Catskills into being. And what ultimately happened was that Jewish culture changed, Jews were welcome in other places, and the sense of community that was built up there that was so important ceased to be important. Jews assimilated and all of the culture changed. And it's just unfortunate that we lost the Catskills altogether. I think when we see Dirty Dancing, we'll see a little bit more of the sense of Jewish community coming together in a hotel experience. And that's a very nostalgic feeling. I don't know that it exists anywhere today.
Well, thank you, Linda, and thank you everybody for watching. Thanks for all the comments and feedback and pearls of memories that you guys have all shared. That's really been a real joy to see that. Thanks again to Bill Tao behind the scenes, and I look forward to seeing everyone at our other program soon. Have a good night, everybody. Thank you.
Okay, great. Good night.